And then when this hit, it hit so hard, it incapacitated me. But after hours and hours inside of that, I started to see light at the end of it. I started to see massive shifts.
The Tony Bova Show, built by pain, designed for freedom.
My guy, welcome to the Tony Bova podcast, where you are relentless by design. I am your host, Tony. I'm very excited to share with you a little bit about my journey that happened back in November of 2022. Basically, my whole life got derailed back then. And it was not just the first time, but it was the first time that I decided to do something different about it. It was the first time where I quit alcohol for 18 months. And it was the first time I started to make significant changes in my life where my emotions started to change, my behavior started to change, and I started to become a whole person. I started to become a version of myself as a man where if I didn't climb through that pain, if I didn't decide differently than I had in previous relationships, previous times in the darkness where a relationship ended and I felt like I completely collapsed. If I didn't make those changes back then I would be left continuing that cycle over and over and over. So throughout this journey, I'm going to share a little bit about what happened back in November of 2022. And I'm also going to give you 3 lessons that I learned along the way. So as I dive into November of 2022, which was about 4 years ago, I was in a relationship that was very significant to me. It was a relationship with a woman that, I really had thought she was my soulmate. That I thought that she was the love of my life and that she was going to be the one for me. And we had gotten stuck in this pattern, cycle, where it was on and off, on and off. And I'd been there before in another relationship. But this one was different. This one was different because I could tell how much she loved me. And that I could tell that what was showing up in the chaos that was ensuing was not from intention. That she really she would actually take ownership of the things that she would do and say and her behavior. And so it left this space and this gap for me where I gave her so much grace along the way. It kind of cratered the relationship, but allowed it to cycle back and forth because at no point in time was I fully holding my ground. And so in November of 2022, she ended up going no contact on me. And it totally cratered me. And I wasn't expecting it because I was expecting it to end, but I wasn't expecting to react that way. Where all of a sudden in that moment, I freaked out. I had no idea what to do. And I had been getting coaching at that point, and I had started to build my frame, and I had started to develop things where I had already been on this journey of like slowly removing alcohol in my life and making different changes. And then when this hit, it hit so hard that it incapacitated me. The first week, I literally was in a journal for about 40 hours where I had written over 100 pages. And then the months that ensued after that, I had written over 300 pages every single day I was in this thing. Because it was the only thing I could do other than drink, watch porn, TV, social media, which I had cut all out, that would soothe me in any way. That would give me any amount of comfort, was to be able to start to talk into this primitive piece of paper and pen. But after hours and hours inside of that, I started to see light at the end of it. I started to see massive shifts. And I started to see a story I had been telling myself since I was 10 years old. Not even realizing it at the time. But it took me jumping over that cliff for what was the 3rd time at that point. A pattern that had been showing up in my life over and over again in relationships. Where I had finally said enough is enough. I cannot continue to do this because this is totally wrecking me. And so I started on a different journey. I started to make those really small choices along the way that started to really change how I saw it, how I was going to show up, who I was going to be at the end of it. That I needed to be a version of myself that was going to be progressively expanding for the remainder of my life. Which is going to lead me into the 3 things that I learned along the way. The first thing that I learned was the pattern is not going to go away until you become aware of it and you deal with it. You see, the pattern in our lives, they can continue to show up time and time again. They show up all over the place, whether you realize it or not. You see, our subconscious is a funny thing where it actually can't tell the difference between illusion and reality. So what often happens is people kind of get caught up in a story where they're like, that shouldn't have happened to me. But until you start to remove everybody else's responsibility and start to look at what's showing up in your life, because wherever you are, there you are. There's a pattern that shows up, because if it's different players and you're the only one that's the same player, you have to examine that. And so for me, this was the third time. So I had to say, well, what's going on for me that's causing this to continue to show up in my life? Because even if this ended and I got into a new relationship and I didn't see what it was that caused my own responsibility in that, then it would have very likely just repeated again. Because we're often drawn to the people that are going to fill the wounds that we continue to carry until we're ready to deal with them. And so in November of 2022, that was when I was ready to deal with it. Which is going to lead me into the second thing that I learned, which is that most things are just distractions. You see, alcohol, pornography, television, social media, food, anything you can think of is likely a distraction. You can even utilize fitness as a distraction. I know I was using it as a distraction. I knew my journal was a distraction because I was so far into it that there was nothing else that I could do with it other than consume it. But it just happened to be a healthier version than going to alcohol, pornography, television, or social media, which all just kind of numb you out. At least while I was working out and while I was utilizing my journal, I was actually doing something with whatever I was dealing with, where the emotions actually could be put in a place where I was changing them, rewriting them. You see, if you're continuing to utilize those things, and there's nothing wrong with alcohol or any of those components, TV, social media, but the thing is that why we use them and why they show up in our life. You see, when most things become a distraction, how are you ever going to find out why these patterns continue to show up until you remove them? For me, it wasn't until I removed everything that was causing any level of distraction where I started to deal with the things that would actually make me a whole person again. Where I would actually start to uncover why I was behaving that way or reacting that way or feeling that way. Because I tell you, I felt like shit. I did not want to be there. It felt overwhelming. I was only sleeping 1 hour a night. I couldn't really be fully present for my kids. It was really hard to be at work. Didn't want to be there at all. Which is going to lead me into my third lesson, which is that you can't live free until you're comfortable being alone. You see, once you become comfortable being alone, that's when everything starts to shift. That's when you don't need anybody any longer, where you're not worried if somebody texts you back. You're not needing to say yes to something in your relationship or at work or to somebody else, where you might be put in that situation where they're going to take from you, or that you feel taken advantage of, or that you're hoping that they're going to give you something in return. You see, once you become a whole person, you get comfortable being alone. You start to like yourself. You start to think you're funny. You start to think you're interesting and that you have something to offer and that you're worthy. And then things start to open up differently. People start to get drawn into your life because they're curious. How did you change? You seem different. I can't tell you how many times I saw somebody I hadn't seen in years and they didn't even recognize me. I literally became unrecognizable because I had lost 60 pounds. I was fit. I had my chest was up and I had confidence that most people didn't know about me before. See, I've always kind of been a little animated, a little dramatic. I have very deep Italian roots. My family's loud and funny and, it's an interesting environment. But nobody had seen this level of calm and grounded Tony, where he was confident and didn't really care what you thought. Because the old Tony, let me tell you, he really very much cared what you thought of him. To the point where he would be so worried if you didn't like him then it would probably ruin his day. See, he used to make decisions based upon other people's feelings. The old Tony would never be here talking to you, sharing his experience vulnerably, sharing what's happened to him and how he's overcome it, and how excited he is to bring this message to other men that need to hear it, that were like the old version of Tony, hurt, struggling, full of pain, not understanding why these things kept showing up in his life, wanting to pour his heart into a relationship, but never actually fully getting what he was looking for in return, not ever really fully feeling appreciated in the process. See, today it feels impossible to be a man. It's such a struggle for us, but it just creates greater opportunity for those men that actually want to do the work, for those men that actually want to develop themselves into a version of themselves that they didn't even know was possible, because I can guarantee you, you are far more capable than you realize. There's far more in you than you ever could imagine. And the reason I can say that to you isn't because I read it in a book. The reason I can say that to you is that's been my life. I had no idea how much I was capable of, and I had no idea how much I could change and turn into a version of myself that was so excited to share some of the darkest parts of my life. The parts of my life that felt so shameful, I wanted to hide or even not be here any longer. So once you figure out there is always hope, that you have the ability to create and change your life through the darkest of moments. It doesn't matter where you've been, what's happened, and what you've done, that you can change it all in a heartbeat. Thank you guys so much for listening to this episode. I really appreciate you. I just want to remind you that you're built by pain and you're designed for freedom. Thank you.